Yeah, so today I'll be talking about eye tracking mental simulation during causal judgment. And I'll first like to start us off with an example, just to show you why this is an important question. In 1994, the Colombian and US football teams went head-to-head in the FIFA World Cup. But early on in the game, a Colombian football player inadvertently made an own goal, which means he shot the soccer ball into the goal that his own goalie was defending. Everybody was furious that this occurred because later on, Colombia went on to lose that game 2-1. And the public was absolutely furious. They blamed him for causing Colombia to lose the game. And a few days later, that player was shot and killed in an abandoned parking lot as a consequence for this mistake. But what's really weird about this example, although completely tragic, is that there are a lot of factors that played into Colombia losing that game. So why was it that the public blamed him and thought that he caused this loss? Asked more generally, how do people come to make these sort of causal judgments and understand causal relationships? There are two leading theories that I'm going to talk about. The first one is process theories. These theories argue that a candidate cause transfers a direct force upon its effect, such as energy, momentum, so on and so forth. So for example, the player kicked the ball into the goal, and that continuous link is argued to be what people consider when judging whether or not this player caused the goal. Oops. The other theory is counterfactual theories. And these theories argue that a candidate cause makes a difference to its effect. So if you were to alter or remove the candidate cause from the given event, then the outcome would not have occurred. So in this example, people might also consider the effect of the goalie. If the goalie had moved in the direction of the ball and had blocked the ball from scoring, then maybe there wouldn't have been a known goal. And so counterfactual theories also consider, would predict that the goalie was also causally relevant to this scenario. Okay, so towards adjudicating between these two major theories, our research group considered using eye movements and mental simulation. Now, why is that? So first and foremost, eye movements have been used in the past to try to adjudicate between these two theories. So for example, Gerstenberg et al. Had participants watch videos of billiard balls moving across the screen. I'm sure we're all very familiar with this study at this point. And sometimes the ball A and ball B would collide, and sometimes ball B would score into the goal. And what the authors found was that when participants were judging what caused the ball to score, or whether or not ball A was relevant to ball B causing it to score, and when people thought counterfactually about where ball B would have moved if ball A had been absent in this scenario, people had a tendency to saccade in the trajectory of where ball B would have moved. So in this picture, it's these open circles here. Ball B did not actually move to that location, but people had a tendency to fixate along that trajectory when thinking counterfactually and thinking about what caused ball B to score, and therefore the authors suggested that people were counterfactually simulating while making a causal judgment. It's a very oversimplified explanation of this study, by the way. Okay, so the other reason why we thought this mental simulation and eye movements might be a good way to try to answer these to adjudicate between these theories is that mental simulations are often accompanied by mental imagery or pictures in your mind. And mental imagery is also often associated with moving your eyes. So I'll walk you through an example experiment. In this task, participants would look at these pictures sequentially, and then they would periodically be prompted to go back and imagine one of the pictures that they had studied. So in this example, they would be prompted to remember the chocolate cake, While looking at a blank screen, participants had a tendency to move their eyes in a direction that was similar to the patterns that they had made while looking at the original picture. So that if they had looked at this top fruit and this bottom right fruit and then the bottom left fruit, they would saccade to the top, saccade to the right, and then saccade to the left, even while looking at absolutely nothing. Just as a little bit of a caveat, it's unsure whether or not these retrospective eye movements, which is how I will continue to refer to them, whether they facilitate that memory recall process or whether they're just sort of an artifact. And I just wanted to make you aware that that is a debate in the literature because it might become relevant later on. Okay, so we had 3 aims with this study. First and foremost, we wanted to replicate these retrospective eye movements in non-static events. We wanted to extend this research to see whether or not people made retrospective eye movements while counterfactually simulating the event. And we wanted to see, similar to Gerstenberg et al., wanted to use these eye movements to see how are people making causal judgments. Okay, so in our task, we had people play a virtual ball shooting game where either they controlled a ball or a goalie. The ball always moved either diagonally to the left or to the right. The goalie always moved either horizontally to the left or the right, such that if the ball and the goalie were to move in opposite directions, the ball would score into the goal. And if the objects moved in the same direction, the goalie would block the ball from scoring. So I'm going to frequently refer to scenarios where the ball actually moved to the upper right-hand corner, but in moving forward, just be aware that the ball could also move to the left. But what we really liked about this particular design, although very simple, the fact that the actual movements of, for example, the ball and its corresponding counterfactual movement is very visually distinct. They're on opposite visual hemifields. And the same thing with the goalie as well. All right, so trial by trial, participants decided where to move their object, either to the left or the right. They had no idea beforehand where they ought to move. They just had to arbitrarily pick. After deciding, they could not change the direction of the object, and they would encode, watching one of those videos, whether or not the goalie blocked the ball or the ball scored. And then they were given a prompt. This prompt could be of one of 3, either remember, what if, or cause. If they saw the word remember, participants were supposed to just, while looking at a blank screen, remember what had actually happened. Mentally simulate and try to create a vivid mental image of what actually had happened. If they saw the phrase what if, they were to mentally simulate what would have happened had they moved their object in the opposite direction. And if they saw the prompt cause, they were instructed to mentally simulate what they thought caused the ball to score or not score. This was left a little ambiguous intentionally, but we did specifically instruct them to create a vivid mental image of whatever it was that they were simulating. And then last but not least, we had end of trial judgments that corresponded with the prompts. I won't go into tremendous detail about those judgments in my main talk. If you have questions about them, I'm happy to talk about them during the question and answer. But instead, I'd like to focus on what were the eye movements doing during this mental simulation period. So we hypothesized that during the Remember trials, when people are mentally simulating what actually happened, participants would have a tendency to move their eyes in the trajectory of where the ball had actually moved. In the what if trials, we hypothesized that participants might have a tendency to look at where the objects counterfactually would have moved. And then the real question, oh, and by the way, I had this just so that you could, follow the trajectory, but you have to remember they're not really looking at anything. It's just a completely blank screen. And so the real question was what happened during these cause trials. Process theories would predict that participants would solely look at the actual trajectory of the ball, Counterfactual theories, though, would predict that participants would additionally look at where the ball had counterfactually moved. So it's both. They would be looking at what actually happened, what counterfactually could have happened, and comparing those two. Okay, so I'll show you the results. At the top here are the different contrasts that we made. So for example, using Gaussian process modeling, we modeled the eye movements during the what-if simulations. We modeled the eye movements during the remember simulations, and then we contrasted them, such that if you see a orange-red color, that means that there were more eye movements made to that particular location for the first condition compared to the second condition. And if you saw the blue color, then it's the reverse. Eye movements were made more for the remember than the what if. And then we filtered this display for our significant effects. So what we showed was that during the what if trials, participants were indeed more likely to look at counterfactual locations. In this example, all of these examples is going to be in reference to the ball condition, by the way. And then in contrast, in the remember conditions, participants were much more likely to look at the actual movements of the ball. That was wonderful. We replicated it in score trials as well. So towards adjudicating between counterfactual and process theories, we showed that participants in cause trials were significantly more likely to look at counterfactual locations compared to remember trials. And again, we replicated this in the score trials. But remember, counterfactual theories predict that they would be looking at both actual and counterfactual locations. They're not exclusively thinking counterfactually. So that's what this contrast is about. And we showed that for both miss and score trials, participants were indeed more likely to look at actual trajectories of the ball when they're thinking causally than when they're thinking counterfactually. So that further confirms the predictions made by counterfactual theories. Now this was really beautiful results. I just wish I could only show this screen and then that would be the end of the story. However, we found more confusing, less convincing results for our goalie condition. Essentially, we did replicate that in the what if trials, participants were saccading to counterfactual locations during the what if simulations and actual locations during the remember trials, but we didn't find really strong evidence for that for counterfactual thinking during the cause trials. It just wasn't as nice and wasn't as pretty. We have a few ideas of why this might be. In short, I think we are potentially underpowered in this condition because there weren't as many eye movements made during that simulation process. But again, we can kind of go into more detail on that during the question and answer. And very quickly, because I think I'm running out of time, we just wanted to make sure that our effects were not artifacts for how people were initially encoding the event. In theory, we shouldn't find any differences during encoding because the prompt happened after. And indeed, we did not find many effects at all during that encoding phase. And the ones that we did find were not consistent with the effects that we found during the simulation phase, and that's true for both the ball condition and the goalie condition. Okay, so just to summarize what we found, we did replicate that people are making retrospective eye movements when thinking about what actually had occurred. People also made retrospective eye movements while thinking counterfactually what would have occurred, and then we found strong evidence in our ball condition that people are making these retrospective eye movements consistent with counterfactual thinking in the cause trials, and therefore we are concluding some evidence in favor of counterfactual theories of causal reasoning. All right, thank you so much.